So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Roundtable at Dissent in China. The event is starting now. I am today's MC, Lulu. So today's event will be conducted in English, and the interpretation service is provided. If you are using interpretation device, please test the channel and the connection first. If you need English translate to Chinese, please switch to channel 1. If you need to translate from Chinese to English, please switch to channel 2. 各位来宾午安，欢迎出席今天的中国意义圆桌论坛。我是今天活动的司仪露露。今天的圆桌论坛将以英文进行，现场会有即时口译的服务。如果你手上有口译设备，请先进行一些测试。那如果你需要英翻中，请转到频道1。如果你需要中翻英，请转到频道2。To facilitate the work of our interpreter, may I ask our guest when you speak or ask a question, please at a moderate pace and write into the microphone. That will be super helpful. Thank you. And today's roundtable on Dissent in China is organized by Freedom House Asia Regional Office. We have the pleasure to share with you, apart from the gathering list conference room, there are more than 75 people signed online, including activists, students, academics, lawyers, and international NGO workers. So they were joining this event from Taiwan and overseas. So greeting from Taipei, and welcome to you all. Now, may we invite Kevin Slayton, the program manager of China Dissent Monitor, to proceed the stage and give us the opening remark. Let's welcome Kevin.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the first roundtable on dissent in China convened by Freedom House. Freedom House was founded in 1941 and it's headquartered in the United States. It's an NGO that advocates for democracy worldwide. My name is Kevin Slayton. I lead our Asia Regional Office, which we opened last September, here in Taipei. And I also manage the China Dissent Monitor project, which we're going to talk about in detail today. In a moment, I'm going to introduce our keynote speaker, but I want to say a few words first about what brings us together today for this roundtable. In the current version of autocracy in China, the Communist Party has an obsession with power that is not merely limited to its political monopoly. It is also acutely concerned with efforts by citizens to challenge the powerful in society more generally, or challenge the structures that buttress the powerful. The party considers the very act of dissenting in public problematic or threatening, even if the target is not the party or the government. The Communist Party's fixation with power does not end there. It goes to great lengths to prevent citizens from even knowing that other citizens are challenging power or how they do it. State media control, pervasive censorship, and algorithmic manipulation are not only directed at messages that are critical of the party state. These measures are also employed to silence or silo information about citizens' attempts to organize and challenge powerful actors in economic or social realms. The bottom-up act of dissenting against those with power. This is what brings us here today. To give a platform to voices and tribulations of Chinese citizens in the People's Republic of China who are otherwise de-amplified or silenced by their own government. And that brings us to our keynote speaker today, who knows a lot about trying to give a platform to the voices of average Chinese people. Li Tingyu documented social unrest and protests throughout China from 2013 to 2016, together with her colleague Lu Yu. Their protest archive, called Non-News, or Wikidana, has been widely used by journalists and researchers to study protests in China. In June 2016, they were arrested in Dali, Yunnan, and subsequently charged with picking quarrels and causing trouble, 寻衅滋事, a pocket crime that Chinese authorities commonly use to silence activists. During their detention, they were awarded the RSF Press Freedom Prize for citizen journalism. After more than 10 months in detention, long interrogations, incessant threats, Li Tingyu pled guilty. She was given a 3-year suspended sentence on the condition that she would not accept the RSF Prize or any foreign media interviews. During and after her suspended sentence, she worked as an English teacher and translator. Her colleague Lu Yu, who did not plead guilty, was sentenced to 4 years in prison for their work. In June 2022, Li Tingyu left China for Germany on a 6-month fellowship program, and she is now in Berlin seeking political asylum while learning a new language and searching for new purposes in her adopted country. Tingyu joins us today virtually from Germany, and I'm very glad now to hand over the stage to her. Thank you.
Hello. Hello, my name is Li Tingyu. I'm very honored to have been invited to Freedom House's Roundtable event, and be able to speak here and to share with you the work my colleague Lu Yu and I did in the past, who we are, why we started the project, our ideas behind it, our experiences running it for 3 years, and some insights we learned from it. So first of all, a bit about the project. The names are a total mess. I don't even know how to refer to it myself. In Chinese, it's usually referred to as 非新闻, and the Twitter account handle is non-news, and the related blog and archive is generally referred to as Wikidona. So from June 2013 to June 2016, Lu Yu and I ran a project archiving social protests that we searched for on a daily basis from Chinese social media. We posted all the information, including pictures, text, links, and videos of all incidents of each day on a Google blog. And from that, we selected several bigger, more noteworthy incidents and posted them on Twitter and Weibo. And of course, our Weibo accounts were almost daily being deleted. And at one point, we had to resort to purchasing Weibo accounts from Taobao. And on the 15th of June 2016, 3 years into the project, we were arrested, like Kevin said, mentioned before, in Yunnan, Dali. We were detained and subsequently charged with the pocket crime, picking quarrels and provoking trouble. And after 10 months in detention and lots of interrogations, I pled guilty, and I was given 3 years of suspended sentence. And during those 3 years, I could not leave my home city, and I had to wear a location tracking tag, and I had to report myself to authority regularly. And while my colleague Lu Yu, he did not plead guilty, and he was given 4 years of prison sentence. And he was released in 2020, but afterwards his passport was soon blacklisted, and he was given a travel ban. He could not travel outside of China.
So during my high school years from 2007 to 2010, Hu Jintao was in power, and censorship was relatively relaxed compared to the all-seeing, all-reaching monster that is today. In media, online, in blogs, even in high schools, social problems were being hotly discussed, written about and debated. And it was also a time where my high school teacher, politics teacher, felt safe enough to tell us about the 89 Tiananmen Square protests. And in the year 2013, I was an English major in Sun Yat-sen University, very frustrated at the education that I was receiving at the time. On the one hand, I was reading about the history of women's struggles, labor movements, or news of politics or social protests from around the world. But on the other hand, I thought to myself, I made a thought experiment. What if I was to mobilize or organize anything at all, like a lighthearted bra-burning rally? And then I came to a natural conclusion. I would have been arrested immediately without a doubt. So it was huge frustration at reality. And also by 2013, Weibo has become a very popular social media platform. And I remember almost all of my friends were posting their Weibo page links on QQ, China's ICQ chat program, urging all their friends to follow them there, and I did too. And in the beginning of 2013, a very important protest erupted in China, and it went viral on my timeline. It happened in a newspaper that I respected very much called 南方周末, Southern Weekly. So what happened was, without first informing the editors, the province's, Guangdong province's propaganda department changed the headline and content of the New Year's editorial. The original text was calling for progress in China's civil society and governing. The published version instead was titled, "We are now closer to our dream than ever before." And in the next few days, Southern Weekly's newsroom went on strike, and public demonstrations against press censorship took place outside the newspaper's headquarters in Guangzhou. My high school friend who was in Guangzhou at the time went there, and he was even briefly taken by the police. It felt so close and personal to me. I was following the protests closely every day, reading and reposting as much as I could on Weibo, especially from people who were at the protest and posting real time. And from this, I became political in real life, not just reading about it. So sort of naturally, I bumped into a group of Weibo users, and they had a funny name. They were called 转世党, Reincarnation Party. They were a mix of people broadcasting anything and everything that challenged censorship red lines, and whose accounts were regularly being deleted, hence the humorous name Reincarnation. And I see them as some of the earliest Chinese internet activists. And among this group of people, I discovered an interesting account called Dogma Mu, which was operated by Lu Yuyu, although I didn't know it yet. And this account was posting about protests almost daily. Each post was deadly simple, a short text of 20 to 30 word characters stating who was doing what at what time, at what place, such as 20 workers blocking which road, in which town, on which date, asking for delayed wage payment. Then several pictures with clearly different username watermarks at the lower right-hand corner of each picture, then links to original accounts who posted them. So for me, seeing this collection of protests, usually fresh happening that day, was exciting already, something that I almost had never seen on Chinese social media. Chinese media, I couldn't believe that so many acts of protests were happening in China and they were not being reported. And more precisely, they were not really being allowed to be reported. They were not being seen widely, and many times they were being met with police violence or criminal charges. And then if you were to click further into the accounts who published the original posts, another world would open up. It was a world made up of direct, vivid, emotional language. Internet users describing their own protest demands in their own words, sometimes describing how they were being treated by the police. It was a world of different perspectives. Participants, friends, or friends of families of participants who were posting to help, various types of passers-by, some sympathetic, some indifferent, some very annoyed. In the next day, if you were to search again for keywords of a certain incident on Weibo again, you could normally find an official announcement from the local government, and in which they avoided using the word protest while denouncing it as an act of disruption and criminality. and sometimes even smugly saying how the police successfully dealt with the incident by arresting this and that person. And I thought to myself, maybe I could do something here to help, something concrete, something I was capable as a frustrated university student who didn't want to get a real job at the time, who had a lot of time, a computer and lots of VPN skills. Then I DM'd Lu Yuyu. We chatted and chatted. I very sincerely proposed to him my ideas, and from there, we started the systematic archiving. So next is a bit about my colleague, Lu Yuyu. He came from a very different world. Lu Yuyu grew up in the 80s and 90s in Guizhou province, in a small village in mountainous area. And his father was the first successful businessman of the village. But after falling out with the local officials, he lost his business unfairly. He later became a 上访户, a petitioner. So a side note here is petition is a system in China where people voice their grievances to the government. It's an internal administrative system to solve disputes, not a judicial system. And Lu Yuyu described his 20s and 30s as wandering around. He wasn't particularly political minded. He played the guitar, he was in bands sometimes, he stayed by friends here and there. He was active on the internet early on, but mainly in the underground music circle. And by 2009, when he registered a Twitter account, he noticed that things were tightening. He was running a music blog at the time, and then he described one day, all of a sudden, all the music album photos that he had linked from his Google Drive album showed up as crosses, so didn't show up. And that was the same year that Google left China. And it was around the same time, Lu Yu had a favorite football commentator and writer called Li Chengpeng. And this football commentator had a Weibo account, and he turned from writing football commentaries gradually towards social and political issues. He was writing a lot of witty and sharp critiques on Weibo, and his articles went viral. And this was, according to Lu Yuyu, how he got onto Weibo in the first place, through football. Now it is hard for us to imagine what it was like on Weibo at the time. There was some level of censorship, but this censorship targeted only direct, straightforward anti-government text. And to a large extent, for a few years, Weibo was an important online public space of social and political discourse, a time and space where many Chinese people learned the language of public political expression, and an important education for many of us. And it was the same for Lu Yuyu. Through Weibo, he became actively involved in dissident circles. And in 2012, while he was in Shanghai, he went to the city center of Shanghai, the busiest thoroughfare, and he held up a banner asking government officials to publicly declare their personal assets. It was a part of a larger movement of activists demanding financial transparency of public officials. And then Lu Yu asked a pedestrian to take a picture of him holding up this banner. Then he posted it on internet. Not long after this one-man demonstration, he was arrested and detained for 2 weeks. So according to Lu, one day when he was on Weibo scrolling, he came across some posts of a big protest on his timeline, and he was curious to find out more. And he started searching for keywords of this incident. He was using the built-in Weibo search engine. Most posts from different other users came up, and it gave him a fuller picture and a better understanding of protest. So he was dying to do something. He was fascinated by this mechanism, how through searching he got a fuller and bigger picture of the protest. So while searching for one thing, another unrelated protest came up. But this unrelated protest, wasn't given any public attention, and nobody else knew about it. And the more So the more he searched, the more he was surprised by how many acts of protest was taking place all over the country. But somehow these protests ended up being isolated bits of information on social media. So on the one hand, with a growing understanding and interest in social and political issues, on the other hand, with a strong desire to do anything at all that could make a change, and also having a lot of time on his hands, Lu decided to systematically use different keywords to search for protests using his phone. He took screenshots of the results, of the search results, and then he posted a few what he considered bigger incidents. This was September 2012. And in the next 9 months, Lu Yuyu spent more and more time on this protest searching. It was a hobby, an interest, a fascination, a mission, whatever you might call it. He did it religiously, and he felt drawn to it. And for a few months, he was working in a factory repairing machines, and he had loads of free time during work. And during his breaks, he would be on his phone searching and posting. And it was against this backdrop that we encountered each other online in 2013. And together in the summer of 2013, we made this project more systematic, more transparent, and safer on the server outside the Great Wall of China. We didn't have a professional background in journalism or archiving, but gradually we developed hands-on knowledge of navigating different Chinese social media platforms and trawling for protest information there. And at the base is a set of reliable and ever-evolving keywords. And out of all of the raw information, we sort them into different individual incidents. And for each incident, a post was created as a container for relevant information. Details of date and place, which group of people, reason of protest, links to original accounts, photos, relevant comments, or relevant text. And for each day, I made a catalog of entries to that day's incidents, giving a bird's eye view. And the idea was simply to display all the information in a way that makes sense, that's easy for any casual reader to click and verify if they wanted to, and which many journalists and academics did. It became an open database for many of them. And for example, in a large environmental protest, many of the posts on Weibo would be deleted soon after being posted. And because of our immediate documentation, we preserved the links to original accounts, important traces for journalists to further investigate and interview and to produce journalistic coverage. Our work was extremely repetitive, mechanical, low-tech, and time-consuming. We didn't have time to develop a more efficient system or to learn new tools. And for us, the daily work of processing such a large amount of information was urgent and already backbreaking. There was once a Weibo user friend who offered to help organize some of the information, but only several days into doing this work, she was visited and interrogated by the police, and she had to stop. And for 3 years, we worked and lived in almost complete isolation. Friends on Twitter and Weibo were the biggest support, and at the back of our minds, we knew that we would be arrested at one point. We just didn't know when or how. And now speaking from 2023, our previous protest archiving work feels like a world away. So how Chinese society is policed and monitored has changed. Weibo has largely disabled its search functions. Short video has become the language of Chinese internet communication. We documented more than 70,000 incidents, big or small, from 2013 to 2016. And what we managed to create is a tiny window into what was happening during those 3 years that was safely in the past. And I think it's very, very important to point out that most of the protests during that period, they weren't political in an explicit sense. They were mostly acts of resisting exploitation and appealing for justice. Farmers resisting land grabs, laborers demanding work payments, property buyers calling out shoddy building quality. And every single act of protest, even if not political in nature, is a group of people joining together, being on the street, holding up banners, making their demands heard and known, risking arrest and voicing grievances, even if their demands for fairness and justice just pertain to their own case. Not the whole of society, they had our sympathy and support. And every act is brave in their own way. People block the roads because they must have exhausted every other channel they knew to express their content or to pursue a solution. And in the context of China, these protesters would likely be met with violence, and organizers would face criminal charges. And for us, putting everything in one place, joining the dots together, even just one day at a time, is powerful. And it's also empowering to read people's own words, to see them on the streets, exercising their rights as a full human being, standing up for themselves. And when I sometimes randomly click around the archive again, it still fills me with a sense of solidarity across time and space. And I feel incredibly honored to have been in that position for 3 years, to have been a witness, to have shuffled around photos for some very important part of human history and experience. So thank you. That was the end of my speech. Sorry for the technical problems. Thank you for your time.
Hi. Thank you so much, Tingyu. We're behind time. We originally wanted to allow some questions. I think just because this is a rare opportunity, we can make adjustments later. Maybe we're going to do like a couple questions, and then we'll just shorten this Q&A section for Tingyu. So please stay on the line for a second, and I will put it to the audience. Are there any questions for Li Tingyu? One there. The microphone's coming from behind.
Okay. Yes, I just wanted to actually say thank you to Li Tingyu. Li Tingyu, I guess you can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So Li Tingyu, when you were arrested, I was Deputy Director of China Labor Bulletin, and I think we sent one of our staff to go and talk to you and Liu Yu. I don't remember if you, I don't know if you remember that, but his name was Keegan Elmer. And he went because, you know, your work was so important to our work. And, you know, we spent a lot of time at China Labor Bulletin creating this strike map. And a lot of the data from the strike map came from your blog. So I just want to thank you very much because, you know, your work was so important to us. And after you were arrested, I want you to know that it took us several years for us to create a machine to crawl the web and collect the same kind of data that you and Liu Yu had done over those years. So I just want to thank you so much. My question to you is, when you were arrested, how important was it for your family to support you during during this time? Was family or friends, an important support group?
Yeah, thank you. So actually, it wasn't. So when I decided to start the project, I stopped any contact with my family because they didn't support me and they wouldn't have supported me. So so when I was arrested, some internet users, they searched my name on internet and they found information to my schools, and then from my teachers, they so human rights lawyers, they wanted to contact my father to get his signature so that these lawyers could represent me, but he didn't give his signature, so he didn't want them to represent me. And then it was very difficult for these lawyers to find my mom and to get her signature. So I think it's quite a pity that because of different politics now, I actually have very, very little contact with my family. And during my time of arrest, I also didn't have contact to friends or other activists. I was very isolated, I think. Yeah, but it was very important to know that we were to see all the support on the internet, financial or and people pulling together, human rights activists and friends. For example, like Keegan, I think he contacted other organizations to help. So yeah, I'm very thankful for that.
Thank you. So because of the time limitation, unfortunately we can't take more questions than that. But I want to thank Ting Yu again, and also not only for your remarks, but also being persistent and repeating the beginning of your remarks. Thank you so much. And if we could give another round of applause for Li Ting Yu. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next section now. It's actually a good segue because one of the last things just in that answer that Ting Yu mentioned is sort of the work that went into this, and also Sean had asked about sort of duplicating a database like this. I don't know that anybody can ever duplicate what Li Ting Yu and Lu Yu did, but we've tried to do something that gets to some similar sort of aims with the China Dissent Monitor. So this next section, we're going to introduce China Dissent Monitor, this project that we started last year, and then we'll have a little break so everybody can take a breather and have a beverage. I can control. Can I control the slides with this now? There we go. Okay, thank you. On November 27th, 2022, the world was captivated by protests that sprung up across China. Large groups of people stood in the streets of Shanghai, Beijing, Chongqing, and many other places. Sparked by a building fire and protest in Urumqi, people criticized draconian lockdown policies. Students across dozens of campuses demonstrated or put signs up to remember the victims of the Urumqi fire. Some even chanted for free expression and rule of law. Many held up white sheets of paper as a clever rebuke to censorship. Many people have come to call this the white paper movement or the A4 movement. And initially, many media reports and commentators have viewed this as an unusual surge in protest in response to a tragedy. But with access to systematic information on protest in China, what our project, the China Dissent Monitor, found is that protest movement at the end of November last year may be more accurately viewed as the intensification of an anti-lockdown movement which had been ongoing for months. Of more than 200 related protests we've documented between June and December 2022, more than half of those protests occurred before the movement at the end of November. This changes our understanding of what happened last year. It was less a sporadic explosion of dissent and more of a multi-month, non-centralized protest movement against government policies in a country where the ruling Communist Party goes to great lengths to prevent such protest movements from forming. And of equal importance is the fact that the movement resulted in the central party state promptly ending zero COVID, a set of policies that was championed by the dictator Xi Jinping himself. China Dissent Monitor, which we refer to as CDM, is an initiative that seeks to systematically collect and analyze the information about the frequency and diversity of dissent in the People's Republic of China. This project is responding to an informational gap created by the current situation of politics and civil society in the PRC. The party state has long censored dissent or posts about street protests on domestic social media. More recently, it has sought to use algorithms to further limit the reach of such posts. The government not only limits exposure of such information, it has effectively criminalized the act of documenting protests itself. This is clearly reflected in the keynote remarks of Li Tingyu and her story. She was arrested for the efforts to archive protests. There are others who have suffered comparable repercussions in China, such as the founder and contributors to Civil Rights and Livelihood Watch, Minsheng Guancha, which documents cases of dissent, especially by petitioners. And there are many untold stories of people who have suffered state reprisals for sharing such information online. The result of all of this is a hole in our knowledge about the scope and content of protest and other forms of dissent in China. And CDM attempts to address this need. We have two major aims in this regard. One is to generate a repository of dissent that is both a record and resource for public use. Second is to increase our collective understanding of dissent in China by coding protest events and providing analysis. For example, as mentioned just a moment ago, CDM enables us to know or to learn that the white paper protest grew out of a multi-month anti-lockdown protest movement. CDM collects data about dissent from multiple sources, including documentation from news media and NGOs, as well as our team's own sleuthing on PRC-based social media. We've also teamed up with Taiwan-based NGO Doublethink Lab to develop a machine learning algorithm to help identify cases of dissent from massive amounts of data on social media. Out of millions of posts that this tool has processed, it has so far been able to identify the 0.05% that contain evidence of offline dissent. From all of these sources of information, CDM has, as of this week, collected more than 2,200 cases of dissent since June last year. Among these, our team has done detailed analysis and coding on about 1,400 of those cases. This coding includes values across 20 variables, such as the date, location, form of dissent, participants, the group and issue involved, repression, and concessions. I should give a caveat up front. While we have logged a lot of protests in the PRC, CDM is not a comprehensive record. We are limited by what we can find and what is documented by others in a restricted media environment. There are many more cases of dissent that go undocumented, and they're not going to end up in our database. In a moment, my colleagues are going to present some more findings about our in-depth analysis from our data. But now I just want to give some top-level statistics to give you a sense of the content of this data in this database. Geographically, the top regions for dissent, according to CDM coded data, are Henan, Guangdong, Shandong, Shanxi, and Hebei. But if you include population and you look at per capita dissent, the top regions are Shanxi, Beijing, and Shanghai. The top forms of dissent represented in our database are group demonstrations, such as street protests, which makes up 71% of the database. So this is a huge focus of what we collect. Second are sign protests, meaning when people hang or write dissent language or banners in public places and leave it there. Followed by solo demonstrations, collective petitioning, labor strikes, obstruction, non-cooperation, such as when citizens intentionally disregard strict lockdown measures last year, marches, and occupation. We also document contentious cases of petitioning, lawsuits, spreading or practicing religious beliefs, and art or performance protests. And I should mention there's a lot of methodology behind this that I'm not going to jump into in this venue. But when we talk about contentious cases, that itself has a pretty detailed definition of what we consider contentious and not contentious. The great majority of our data is offline dissent. Only 3% of the cases in our database are online dissent, and this is by design. CDM prioritizes capturing offline protest events and includes only a sample of online dissent, such as hashtag campaigns or viral posts, in order to provide readers with examples of the diverse forms of expression that people use in the PRC to express dissent. A wide range of issues drive these events. Some of the most frequent are related to housing or property, such as stalled housing, construction quality, property management disputes. Wage and benefits, pandemic policies, and fraud are also top grievances. Other issues include land rights, school safety, and public utilities. About 100 cases in this database involve grievances linked to civil and political rights, such as freedom of religion or belief, corruption, state violence, censorship, or even demands for political reforms. The top groups engaged in dissent are homeowners and homebuyers, urban residents, and workers. Other groups include students, investors, and villagers. It's important to mention that it's easier to find information about the dissent of Han Chinese relative to ethnic minorities who are facing stricter information controls. Despite this, relying in part on our partnership with NGOs and reliance on NGO documentation, CDM has so far coded 17 cases of dissent by ethnic Mongolians and Tibetans, and not counting more events in our backlog which have yet to be coded, including cases of Uyghurs who, despite extreme social and controls and censorship, managed to dissent. Similarly, we have collected 24 instances of dissent in the LGBTI community, and we've also documented another 20 cases of religious minorities dissenting through practice or sharing their beliefs or other forms of protests, including Christians, Falun Gong, and Muslims. The most common target of dissent are private entities, led by real estate companies. While many grievances originate with corporate conduct, protesters still end up making demands of the government or accusing them of culpability for a lack of oversight. 29% of the cases in our database have been directed at local government entities, and 4% have been directed at the central government. Demands in these cases are also diverse. They tend to track with the issue at hand. For example, worker protests usually involves demanding unpaid wages. Housing protests often calls for company accountability, the completion of housing projects or refunds. Notably, direct demands on the government have occurred in nearly 1/3 of the cases that we've coded. CDM has documented evidence of repression in 1/4 of all of our coded events in the database. The most common form is a police presence, followed by arrests and detention, state violence, non-state violence, intimidation, or dispersion. It's important to note that we are confident that this is an underrepresentation of the actual occurrence of repression. Why are we so confident despite only having limited information? CDM only codes for repression when there is direct evidence of it, evidence that we can show the reader, such as a photo or a video. But in many cases, these photos and videos are just a tiny snapshot of the course of an entire protest. So we may only see police surrounding demonstrators in a 10-second video, and so we'll code that as a police presence. But 5 minutes later, we don't see that the police round them up and arrest them, so we don't code that as detention or arrest. So we're pretty confident that even with 1/4 of events having some form of repression, it's an undercount. CDM's database also indicates instances of concessions. For example, when the government changes policies in response to dissent, or when wages are paid in response to worker protest. Data on concessions is very limited because concessions often do not occur until after the protest or dissent event has finished, meaning that CDM doesn't have access to that information at all. Despite this, we still find it valuable to record instances of concessions when these occur, or when the evidence is available. Finally, we keep track of when a dissent event is linked to some sort of movement. CDM has found that 13% of the cases in its coded database are linked to a movement, including the anti-lockdown protest movement at the end of November last year, the real name complaints movement, the Henan depositors movement, and others. Despite everything that the Chinese party state has done to prevent protest movements, it's remarkable that citizens still manage to organize so many movements in a non-centralized way. So that's the end of my overview of some of our findings. And next I'm going to hand over the mic to my colleague Mingze, who's going to talk about some in-depth analysis of the white paper protests and housing protests.
So generally speaking, one of CDM's main goals is to reveal the everyday nature of dissent in China. For most of the protests we recorded, it's not a larger goal that motivates participants to take action, but rather injustice and or dissatisfaction they experience related to infringement on their rights or interest. So in talking about the white paper movement, we would rather highlight people's discontent with the lockdown measures that had been building up for months before the large-scale protest ignited by the Urumqi fire. So beyond the more noticeable calls for political reforms, we saw lots of small-scale localized clashes with neighborhood councils or police over the restrictions that prevent people from commuting to work or going out for groceries. In the COVID-related protests, we recorded only less than 10% of them, so protesters make political demands. And in the large-scale protests in late November 2022, only 15% saw people hold blank sheets of paper in protest. The vast majority of protesters simply wanted the government to leave the invasive lockdown measures so they could return to their normal lives before the pandemic. This is why we set the theme of this roundtable as from housing protests to the white paper movement. We like to point out that while the white paper movement is significant for more than one reason, these everyday issues that are often overlooked are the most frequent sources of dissent in China. And the most representative one is housing. So with more than 1,400 events coded in the database, nearly a quarter occurred due to the stalled construction and delayed property handover. If we add in other related issues, such as dissatisfaction with the construction quality or the developer's false advertising, property-related protests account for 1/3 of all events recorded in CDM. So the role of home ownership in Chinese society contributes to these disputes. For example, parents, they need to have a house in the school district so their children could be admitted first. And when it comes to marriage, there is pressure for men to have his own house before he gets married. So these social and cultural factors make housing a hotspot of dissent in China. It also makes housing disputes more likely to involve middle-class citizens, in contrast to labor disputes, which are often led by economically marginalized migrant workers. So since 2016, the Chinese government's changes in real estate market regulation has caused more housing protests. And after China established its pre-sale housing system, it's very common for developers to use the money from home buyers of an earlier project to invest in a separate new project. But after Xi Jinping announced that houses are for living in, not for speculation, the Chinese government started to control developers' debt levels, making it harder for them to obtain financing and refill the funding gap. As they were unable to pay construction companies, a massive amount of housing projects stalled and remained unfinished. But even if the construction is not finished, homebuyers still have to pay their mortgages. Some of them choose to move into these empty concrete caves without windows, elevators, water, and electricity, as they cannot afford both the monthly mortgage repayment and rent. They have to collect water from pits at the construction sites and climb several flights of stairs just to get back to where they call home. So in this situation, homebuyers' protests were getting more intense than before. And eventually a wave of nationwide protests erupted. Between July and September 2022, homebuyers in 119 cities in China announced that they would stop paying their mortgages unless the construction resumed, as a way to force the authorities and banks to step in. This wave of protests ultimately forced the Chinese government to change their policies. At the same time, the government may perceive a threat from the scope and frequency of housing protest, which might be why CDM data shows that housing demonstrators are twice as likely to experience violence by police and non-state actors like security guards than those non-housing demonstrations. Whether it's the white paper movement or the nationwide mortgage payment boycotts, there was a lot of everyday local conflicts and discontent that accumulated across regions and over time before this larger, more visible protest took place. And we think CDM's database provides a glimpse into that everyday side of Dissent, patterns they share, and the trends that arise from it. So now my colleague Tel is going to introduce some of our findings on labor protest and how you can use our database to explore more.
Well, thank you, Mingzhe. And now I'm going to share some of our key findings on labor dissent in China. The data we have collected paints a vivid picture of the challenges faced by workers and the factors driving their protests. Workers have emerged as the driving force behind 33% of all dissent events captured by CDM since 2022. This accounts for a staggering 1,742 cases, making labor protests one of the top two sources of dissent recorded by CDM. So what fuels these protests? Which areas stand out as the primary catalyst? And construction workers comprising approximately that half of the coded cases most frequently bear the brunt of unpaid wages. Transportation workers, as you can see, follow closely at 15%. However, it's important to note that labor protests span across various sectors, including education, retail, sanitation, health, and tech. So, as you can see, when workers fail to obtain their rightful wages through institutional channels, they turn to alternative means to express their grievance. Group demonstrations account for 68% of cases, with strikes representing 11%, and solo protests at 8%, and occupation of space at 3%. So what particularly striking is the surge in the labor dissent during the Lunar New Year period. As you can see on the screen, in January and February 2023 alone, our preliminary data indicates 261 labor protests. This compares to a total of 341 protests recorded in the preceding 6 months period from July to December 2022. These cyclical patterns can be attributed to the circumstances faced by internal migrant workers, 移民工, who often face the daunting prospect of returning home for the holiday. So, digging deeper, we find two fundamental reasons behind the persistent issue of wage arrears. Firstly, a lack of union rights. Independent labor unions have systematically been suppressed by the CCP. leaving the CCP control All China Federation of Trade Unions, the ACFTU, as the sole labor union. This hampers workers' ability to collectively negotiate or hold employers accountable when they refuse to pay their employees' wages. And secondly, lax enforcement of labor laws, also one of the problems. Despite China's relatively strong labor protections on paper, I mean the law and regulations, but employers frequently disregard them due to ineffective inspection and enforcement. Furthermore, labor disputes are often fragmented into individual cases, diminishing the collective power of workers. So beyond the cyclical nature of Chinese New Year labor protests, we have observed a link between the broader economic landscape and labor protests. Construction companies and real estate developers are often the target of the Dissent. Labor protests, so the lack of liquidity in the real estate industry has not only triggered widespread protests over stalled housing projects, but also resulted in inadequate funds to pay workers on time. This leads to wage arrears that can persist for months or even years. The economic slowdown in the later half of 2022, partly due to the strict COVID-19 measures, has likely further contributed to these challenges. While it seems probable that these economic factors contribute to wage arrears, it is important to note that our data only starts from last year, so it does not allow for a direct comparison with labor protests in previous years that could provide further insight into the full impact of recent economic changes. So my conclusion is the issue of labor dissent in China demands our attention. In a country where independent labor organizing has long been suppressed, workers are responding to labor rights abuses by taking to the streets and making their voices heard. Given the structural factors behind this grievance and the relative slowdown of China's economic, we would expect labor dissent to continue to be a major feature of our database in the future. So next, I will just take some time to introduce the website. So where to find the CDM database? Of course, Google. And China Dissent Monitor. And of course, you can access to our database by click on the icon or visit chinadissent.net. Well, so how to use the CDM database? This is the front page of our database. So you can search by keywords or date, and you can use the advanced search. Of course, you can download the full data in Excel form by clicking the download of the right-hand side. And you can pull down by using the drop-down menu to select variables like target, location, participants, posts. So you can see the pictures of each variables. So when you click on the case, like when you click on the 14485 case, you can see the case details and, of course, the description and evidence of each case. Well, so we will try our best to provide photos or videos in each case, so that prove that this was actually happened in China. So this is a quick introduction of the CDM database and where to find the CDM reports. Since last year, we have already issued three issues, and there are some in-depth insight of different protests in China. So you can also explore the data by downloading the issues on our website. So lastly, you can scan the QR code and explore data. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for sharing from the team CDM. So now it's a break time. So the next session, and actually our first panel will start at 4:50. So 2:50, sorry. At 2:50. So please return to the conference room within 8 minutes. Thank you.